This is the workshop about the ASEAN Plus database. The idea is to give you an overview what it really is actually, but then in a second part also to use it and see whether it can be useful to your research and see if you have feedback about how to improve it and what we could do better to iterate in the future. Because this is really just a quite early beta version, but we're working on improving it. So my name is Manuel Stegars. Most of you know me already. I'm a senior researcher here at SEC, and I've been leading this project here, but also on the team have been Rongchun Quinn for the last few months, working on the scripts for spidering and metatagging all the data and also setting up the technical infrastructure. And also Rishad Patel actually has just signed recently for the front-end design and for the user experience. So thanks a lot, you guys, for working on this project with me, and thanks for your good ideas. And also thanks a lot to everybody else who, in the course of this project, has given me feedback while we were just iterating and collecting ideas. This is basically just the overview of the workshop. I'm just going to briefly introduce the database, what it actually is. Then I'm just on the very, very surface, I'll talk about my data quality research, because I've been talking about it a little bit with some people here. I can just formally introduce it, but I will not go into depth. It will just be an overview. Then we'll start some use cases. So I'll give you the address of the database later. If you have your computer here, you can use your own computer. Otherwise, we run through a few use cases here on this big screen. And then I'm also talking about the future development of the database and then wrap up. So what is this database? What is our universe of the data? It's basically the ASEAN, all the 10 countries. It's basically statistical data that's publicly available from the 10 countries of the ASEAN, plus also China and India. So when we talk about data, many of you think it's about maps or other things. Here we just talk about statistical data. So these are the data sources that we considered here in the beta version, 8 data sources. In general, we have over 100 data sources that we would like to include. But here for the beta, we just basically had to narrow it down a little bit. And the type of statistics that's available, basically, it's the economic indicators, the socio-demographic data, some vital statistics, and then program-related statistics, something from UN Habitat, World Bank, or ADB. Now, so far we have, it's a little bit less actually, the 24,000. It's maybe 18 or 15,000, I guess. We have data sets from these countries in the database. You see China has a lot because they release a lot of data about their statistical yearbooks. And some of these countries we couldn't access directly, so we spidered data from the World Bank or from ADB. Basically, I'll tell you in a little bit how this actually works, how we figure out which data fits to which country. So here you see the years. It's also actually quite interesting. This is India. You see there was a census in 2011. That's why all of a sudden the number shot up of the data sets available. But in general, you see that most data goes back to the year 1990. And really a lot of data we get here. From 2000, we have a really broad selection. So some data are available, but they're not so easily accessible. So that's why so far they're not yet included. But this is what you can expect when you go on the database. So I briefly want to talk about the ontology, how the information is organized in the database. So basically, here's just your plain old data set. And this is something actually that Rongchun has been working on, to write scripts to extract the metadata from these data sets and then write it into a database so it can be easily found, so it can be referenced later. So basically we took the name, we took the name of the data set, the name of the just the basic description, then all the years. We extracted all the words, eliminated the doubles, sorted them, so you can then find the database, the data sets. Then we also needed to know where does the data come from, because I'm sure you've had this problem. You downloaded a whole bunch of data sets, then they're on your desktop. You have no idea what they are, where they come from. With the database, you don't have this problem anymore because everything is tracked. Every single data set, we know where it's coming from, and you can always access this information. Why is this important? One is, of course, to find the data, but another one is also for citation. So oftentimes it's a little bit tricky how to actually cite a data set. The way it's done in the publications that I work with, you make a footnote and then you extract where does it come from, when, what is it, what's the source, and when did you access it. And you make this neat little citation. You can automatically generate this now with this database, because whenever you download data sets, it gives you a catalog of what you downloaded. So you'll have immediately an easy citation reference. That so far was the overview. Just I really wanted to keep it short because I know the fun will be when we actually use it. So just a very brief introduction. Now here I want to talk about this data quality research that I've been doing. Basically, most people will agree that the data are not always that accurate that we get here in the region and also everywhere else. For example, in Greece, we saw that they lied massively about their GDP. So, but what is really the problem? We don't quite know. You know, it's easy to say, oh, it's not correct and you can't trust it, but then what do you do? Because sometimes it's the only data that you have to work with. So I looked into some of these data quality problems, where I took basically the numbers of the GDP, the nominal GDP of the National Statistics Office, and compared it with what's available at the ASEAN Stats. That's the statistics organization from ASEAN. And here you basically can see that there are some discrepancies. You see the Philippines, if you go to their website, their GDP was 21% higher than the same number for the same year reported on the ASEAN Stats website. So I was interested in why that is. That happens with everything. Even you can say, well, I don't trust the individual country, I just go to the UN. But even there you have issues. You know, they're not all the same, these numbers for the same things. And then many people use the World Bank statistics, and surely those can be trusted, they think, but actually also that's not really the case, because there's huge divergences everywhere. Some countries are very consistent in just having the same method, but here this could be because maybe they changed their methodology, maybe they, you know, reported different data. We don't quite know. So what I did is I looked into these dimensions of the data quality, basically the institutional environment, what is the framework, who's collecting these data, and what are the laws behind the data. Then I looked into the processes that they use. For example, do they have a standard? Do they have standard methods, or can they always change them at will, whatever fits them best? And of course, the statistical output. Here is just one example. I'm just really quickly going through this. If anyone's interested in this in more detail, I'm happy to explain you more. This is really just a brief introduction. So basically, if you look at one dimension, it has several indicators. What I did then, I looked at all these texts, you know, the statistics acts, the releases themselves, the yearbooks, also standards boards that they're members of, maybe the IMF, and et cetera, and you can find a lot of information about how countries actually put together their statistics. Then I asked some questions and I rated them on a scale from 1 to 10. And with that, you actually then get a rating for the statistical quality of a country. Now here it gets interesting, because now you can basically compare what is the quality of these countries in comparison with each other. So you can see, if you just add up all these different dimensions, you can see that there's some clear laggards that have very, very low quality according to this method, and some are quite high. Countries, if they could just not care, they could say, well, okay, that's just how we do things. But with statistics, you want to work internationally, and then if you're lower here than your peers in the in the international comparison, then you basically lose in trust. You can never really work with the data to gain deep insights. So with these ratings, you can group the countries into different groups that are more advanced or less advanced, and then you see where the problems are. You can quite clearly pinpoint in which areas these countries could improve to produce better data quality. So you saw Group A, there's some issues. Group B, there's very similar issues. In general, they still have a lower level of statistical development. And then in Group C, that's the lowest, the least developed countries. They're basically just everything is really lacking, and the quality overall is quite poor. So if one goes on a website, downloads some data about Myanmar or Cambodia, it's it would be advisable not to trust it one for one. Okay, good. So that was the introduction to the database. That was the introduction to the data quality research. Now I would like to actually use the database. If you have your computer, then I can give you the address, so you can log in yourself. This is an intranet website, so it will not work from outside of this building. If you go on the website, go on search, because if you just go on the main, that's just a placeholder site. This is, mind you, this is really just a beta version. It's very early, but I wanted to introduce it nevertheless and see where we stand at this point. So basically go here, go to search, and then you see the overall search interface. So with most of you, I've discussed this idea with these topics where we said, let's think about statistics that would be useful for individual research projects. And some of you have come back with ideas. For example, I believe Lincoln, you sent me something about your research this morning. The group about bamboo wanted to know about GDP in different countries where bamboo grows. So our idea is to produce topics that use this database that can then basically be accessed by everybody, so we have a common ground. We know what is the position of FCL or SEC in general on the population up to the year 2050 or urbanization prospects. So we just have basically a general main statistical baseline. So yeah, I mean, we can just run through one example, and otherwise the database is always up, so you can use it anytime with the address. And of course, I'm very happy for your feedback. Yes?
We have a really simple one, GDP for every country.
GDP, okay. Okay, good. GDP. So basically, search title and content. This you should keep enabled at all times, because then, remember how I showed you in the beginning the ontology, how it extracts the metadata? It will search in the table, but also it will search all the words that are mentioned in the data set itself. So you should always enable this. We basically made this box to just see what happens if we search just the title or just everything. So now here you can select which country. So what did you say, Lincoln? Everything, right?
Everything.
All countries. So I want to know GDP for all countries in the ASEAN Plus. Okay. Year, here we just leave it, because this also is a somewhat experimental feature at the time being. We found that most people aren't really interested in years, because you have the years anyway in the data set itself. So if you restrict it, then you just, basically restrict your universe of data sets you have available for searching. So this, basically then you hit this little icon here, and you'll see it found, for the query GDP, it found 1,334 data sets. So now, this is from these, I think, approximately 10 different sources. Some of the national statistics offices of the countries, I believe Indonesia, also China, and then we have the UN Habitat, the ADB, the World Bank. So basically, with one search query, it searches all these data sets. And basically, you see here some statistics about the statistics. Where are they from? In this case, most comes from the ADB, from the Asian Development Bank, but some also from the World Development Indicators, that's World Bank, and then you have some individual ones. So basically now if you scroll down on your page, you have a list of all the data sets that it found. So if you just want to quickly see what this is, you go to this icon here. This one, this little icon. It gives you a screenshot of the data set. So basically now if I want to download any of these data sets, then I can click here. You see on this box, I scroll down and I say download. You see this folder here, it will basically create a folder wherever you, I mean here in this browser it was set up to automatically download into the download folder. But if you have it set it up so it asks you for a destination, then you can type in where you want it saved. And so now you have this folder here on your database, on your hard drive. It's an archive, so it's zipped. So you have to unzip it first, extract. So now here, this is basically what you get. This you see, this is the GDP national accounts from the Asian Development Bank. This one was just the first or the second that I selected, but it basically, the returns that I got on that page was basically a query into the description of the data sets and the names. So every single data set that you should get should somewhere in the data have the word GDP. And basically now let's look at this citation guide. With this file that's automatically generated, when you hit the download button, you will see which data set basically is what is the name of the data set, and how can I make a citation to that data set. So here you see you have the name of it, you have the source, the year, and you have the title of the data set, and the address, and the date when it was spidered. So the date when we downloaded it and put it into the database. So with this you can basically, you can write a paper with this. You can work with these data and collect data through the database, and you always have a reference. Shall we do another one, or is it clear so far? Yield. Okay. Crop yield.
For a specific date range.
For a grain?
Date range.
The date range. Right now, I don't really want to use it because it's still experimental, the date range. But yield, maybe rice yield.
That sounds good.
Okay, good. Rice yield. Philippines, Singapore, rice yield in Singapore.
Let's say Philippines.
Philippines, rice yield in Philippines. And sources, which sources should we use? All, or basically we can say we just want ADB, or we only want World Bank, or we only want UN sources. Maybe, for now, let's use all, because I suspect that maybe there's not that many right now. So see, now we have 5 returns for rice yield. And you see here, this is interesting, because you got some from other countries too. Why is that? Because both names, basically it said Philippines and China in the same data set. Maybe it was exporting rice from, or importing rice from or to Philippines with China. It's maybe something like this. So it will also give you just the countries that it will give you returns that these countries have relationships with. So here maybe we can use all, right? Shall we try? Select all. So let's say we want them all, we want to see what's happening. And now I have these 5 data sets. You see 4 from ADB, 1 from the World Development Indicators. Then we could go here, and I'm quite sure we would find rice yield somewhere. But let me show you again the comma-based, that overview file, because that's really powerful when you have, of course, more than one data set. So now you see the database, the data set names. You see where they come from, which year they are for, what the official title is of the data set, and the source, of course, and also the date we accessed it. That's basically one other example. And then, of course, it's up to you what you're doing with these data. It will not do all the work for you, but at least you can access data from very different sources quite easily and conveniently. And the way we think this is helpful is as an entry point to research. Of course, if you have very deep data that you collected yourself in the field, then of course, you know, this will not be all that helpful unless you want to see relations or you want to get other data that is maybe not related. But the data here is mainly on the national and on the subnational level, meaning provinces, regions. So we don't have cities right now. There's no village area. I mean, it's not very disaggregated. It's still quite coarse. But it's everything that's available publicly on these websites. And then, of course, you could use this as a starting point and then build on it with your own work. And does anybody have any questions about this so far? Yes? So see here we have the data sources for this last query. So the World Development Indicators, that's the World Bank. And the ADB, that's the Asian Development Bank. The data sets that we downloaded are exactly the same that are also on the websites of the World Bank and of the Asian Development Bank. So, you know, it's as reliable as you believe these institutions have done their homework. And I personally think that the ADB and the World Bank are quite trustworthy institutions, definitely more trustworthy than going to, you know, some aggregator websites. I mean, there are some aggregator websites that query all the sources of publicly available data, but there oftentimes you lose the source information, so you don't really know where it's from. You definitely don't get a citation guide, and you also don't quite know what they did with the data, because oftentimes they work with the data sets, put them in a certain format. So none of this has been done here. We basically just aggregated the data, meta tagged it, and put it into the database itself. Which window?
The one which popped up.
The pop-up window, ESC. ESC. Escape, yes. Well, it wouldn't happen unless somebody tends to it. It doesn't automatically update. Because you have to think about it like this. Have you ever been on a website of these statistical, national statistics offices? Maybe the Indonesia you've seen. So basically you have a whole bunch of menus, you go there and then you can search maybe, or you have a table builder, you can create a table and then you can hit download and you download the table. What Rongchun did is he wrote scripts that do this automatically. It's basically simulating a user doing this. And then we let it run for a few days and basically aggregated all the data that's on these sources. And to update it, you have to do it again. But of course, you know, one idea is now to basically have a process for more frequent updates. It's a very good point. This is really, this for us was, one, it was a feasibility study. Can this be done? And if one wanted to do it, how can we do it? Automate it. You can always have a whole bunch of people sitting there and download a lot of data sets, but that's just not really scalable. So we wanted to try to find a way with programming to try to aggregate all these data sets, organize them in a way that they can be found. And so far, our universe is not that big. You know, we only had, I think, 8 to 10 data sources. But if you have a robot doing this work, you could have 100 data sources. And that will be the next step. For now, we had to really iron out the problems, see what the issues are. For example, some of these data are really not easily accessible. You know, you have in some countries you need accounts to even see the data, to even download the data. Then other countries, they don't make Excel files available, they only make PDFs available. Others, they only have HTML websites. And then the tables are actually images in the website. So it's very hard to analyze these data. And you know, it's not straightforward. So this basically is one way how one could approach this. So I think we have a pretty good roadmap for that. Yes? The windows didn't work properly. You mean there's some scaling? It goes beyond the window? Yeah, that, you know, we're still ironing that out. That's still a problem. Well, this one is Chrome. And this is on Windows. I used Firefox on the Macintosh.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Firefox you can use.
That's one you mentioned.
Well, whether the source is reliable, that's up to the source. But we think that the data that we have in the database is a mirror of the source. We did open the database, the data sets to make the screenshots. And it may be that maybe something happened there. You know, it's never foolproof 100%. But that's exactly what we were very careful about, that we have the original data sets. Because if you go on an aggregator website, oftentimes they take the data sets that they find somewhere and then they put it in one format. So you already have a risk for conversion errors. And here we did not do any conversion. Basically, we have a library that points to these files. Yeah, but see, for example, the data quality, it's not clear cut. It's not black or white. You can never say, this is great and this is always really horrible. For example, the World Bank. The World Bank has very poor data on Myanmar. You know, a lot of gaps, a lot of holes. I don't know why. You know, for example, the UN, UNCTAD stat has really good data on Myanmar. So, you know, the data are there, they're available. Some bodies, they report them, others don't. Then the World Bank also, they oftentimes use their own methods. So, let's say you have data in the World Bank indicators about GDP. What happens? You know, the World Bank doesn't make their own research into GDP. They basically they make a data request from the statistics office for raw data, and then they send them a table. They have to fill out the table, send it back to the World Bank, and then they work with this and make their own calculations. So, the World Bank has some proprietary ways to aggregate data. And that's not always comparable with other ways. So the World Bank, if you just want a quick one, is definitely trustworthy. If you say data source World Bank, nobody will question it. But then again, if you really want to drill deeper later, I would not necessarily work with the World Bank. Yeah, but see, then what happens is then your term was too wide. Let's say you search for GDP. Okay? So you search for GDP all, you get 1,334. But we had, you see, basically we searched countries all, data source all. Then we can narrow it down here. We can say which countries do we really want. You know, maybe we want all of ASEAN. And maybe let's just go to the ADB, let's say what they have, you know. And you can narrow it down then. And okay, it's still a lot, 700, but you can start to whittle it down. Then you can look into individual countries. For example, if you go to, let's say you say GDP, I just want the GDP for Indonesia from the Indonesian Statistics Office. You know, just the official data that's out there. Let's see what that is. 24 data sets. Sure, it's still more than just a few numbers, but I mean, you can manage that. And now you can download them. You can say select all, or you can inspect them before, like we did, you know, with the screenshot. And now you see you have your ID for Indonesia. You have your 24 data sets about GDP in one way or another. It's very, very hard to find cities data that's consistent. Usually it's point-in-time data. Somebody made some project about, you know, benchmarking 50 cities in 2008, and that was it. You know, but there's very little data that is continually updated on the city level. Right now, the granularity is subnational. So you have provinces, regions. So then you have UN Habitat data, but that's also point-in-time. You know, they didn't update this over time. So we looked into this, and if you remember, we discussed how we should approach it. And I think the city level data would be the next step. Because you will always, in one way or another, need the overview data to put it in relation. You want to see, you know, does this even make sense? We basically have just the basic menu of statistics that you would get in a statistical yearbook. So you have the population, you know, demographic indicators, economic indicators, like GDP, income, things like these. And then also some vital statistics, births, deaths, you know, these kind of things. And then you have program related. For example, if you have the UN Habitat, where they looked into the quality of life of cities, then you have that. But I can make a list if you like. I mean, in the beginning I had these 8 sources, and then I showed which kind of data is available. Okay, future development. Of course, right now we have quite a limited number of sources. The idea is to broaden the number of sources and also add more data sets that we have already. For example, we have all the data from the open data platform India, I believe, but we didn't meta tag it yet. It's not in the database yet, but the India data we actually have a lot. So now I'm thinking, how can we put this there? There were some issues. How can we tag it? How can you organize it? So the idea is just more of the same. Then also I want to work on these topics and use cases. So some of you already had some feedback, but if any of you have ideas that is research specific, where you say, look, I would like a comparison of GDP in all the ASEAN countries, for example, or I would like a comparison of GDP versus population in all the ASEAN countries, then we can make this, and it will basically then become a topic that is accessible also, hopefully, on this database website to everybody. Also, right now we're working on the front end and the user experience. So right now it's still, it's really technical, but the idea is that it can be easily accessed also from pads, from mobile devices. Then also one thing that's quite interesting, I think, is the APIs, because right now we have a MySQL database running for the library. But if we had a wrapper that would basically create a data stream out of the individual data sets and access this with APIs, then one would never have to download the data. It could always stay in the database, and you'd basically program an application to analyze the data directly on the API. So that's also something right now I'm looking into. Then there's also Sphinx. Sphinx is a really elegant search engine where you start typing and it will, in Google style, already populate your results page, so you never have to hit search and then it gives you, your returns. It automatically generates this all the time on the back end. That's also something right now I'm investigating. Then this also would be interesting, I think. Some of you have collected data that, of course, many of you work on your research or your PhD, so it's proprietary, you don't want to share it, but other data is actually available for sharing. So I would like to explore ways to take the data that from research projects are available to put in the database. And that I think would be really interesting. That also I want to address in the coming months. Then another big topic is open data. Open data platforms, there's right now 6 open data platforms in the ASEAN. And they all have APIs. So maybe we don't have to spider the data sets on our hard drive, meta tag them, put it in the library, and then download them. Maybe we can directly use the API from the open data platform to query the database. And then, Remo, we would have this update problem no longer, because we would basically outsource the updates to the open data platform. We directly query the source itself. And the interesting thing is then to take this and mix it with data that we have locally. Because already you can use the Open Data Portal, but the idea is that you can use everything at once at the same time. So, and then of course linked open data, LOD, that's also really interesting, I think. This is basically a way to do away with the whole database structure, in a sense. To say, let's just tag each data set in a certain way and then publish it onto a certain server infrastructure, so it becomes part of this linked open data cloud. So I'll talk about open data and linked open data just a few minutes, because I find it so interesting. This is the open data issue that I just brought up. There's already 6 portals here, but again, like always, in these countries and elsewhere too, the quality is not that high. Some of the open data portals have very few data sets, just less than 100. Some of them are really poorly organized. Others just have PDF files. They're just libraries, but they still call themselves open data portals. So that's one thing I'm looking into right now. How reliable are these data sources? Are they useful for us? And if they are, how can we access them and put them into the database? And now linked open data. Some of you may have seen this nice graphic here, this is the linked open data cloud. Let's briefly just say what is open data. So there's these 5 identifiers what actually linked open data is. One is it's of course open, then you have these URIs that identify the data precisely. They're published on the internet, of course. You have RDF format, and then you use Sparkle to query them. I think we could have, in the long run, SEC as one of these nodes in this cloud. Why is this interesting? Because then we could query all the data sets that other parties have published into the cloud and mix it with our own data for very rapid finding of correlations, find other relationships. We can make mashups very quickly. I think this would be really interesting. Right now, most people just make their own data. They make their data tank somewhere on the hard drive, but this would be really, really powerful. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. And does anybody have any feedback, any questions?
What percentage of data do you think we're missing out by only looking at English data in ASEAN or China or India?
You mean open data or?
Just any general data sources that you looked for. Like I know that the Chinese statistical organization, they duplicate their data from Chinese and English.
Yeah, correct.
So not really missing anything there. So
Yeah.
let's say there's a lot of valuable rice data in Thailand, but it's only available.
Yeah, Thailand's a problem. Yeah. Well, that's part of the data quality research as well. Thailand has barriers to accessibility, and one of them is the language barrier and also the date format. They have a really strange Buddhist date format, so you never quite know which date you're actually looking at, and sometimes they're converting it, sometimes they don't, so you have the year 2557, and so it's quite hard. But I think the more specific we get, the more we miss out. You know, once you go on the city level, below the regional, below the national and then the regional level, most data are not translated into English. But hopefully, I think, because many of these statistics organizations are opening up, and also now because they want to make this ASEAN economic community, they are actually quite open, I think, to feedback. So maybe if we had an interesting data solution, we could approach them and try to work with them on some of their data issues. But you're right, we do lose, the more granular data we need, the less accessible it is. It's a problem. Yes. Yes?
Can I just make a few very general remarks?
Sure.
This project started in March, and funnily enough, we started off trying to develop an index for the sustainability of cities. It seems a long, long way back that actually the discussion was not to create a database exactly like this, but to see whether it was possible to use publicly available data to collect an index of city sustainability.
Right.
And it's been a remarkable ride since then. I mean, we've learned, and particularly Manuel has learned an enormous amount about the kind of data which are available, the pitfalls, the problems of interpretation, and so on. We've also learned that this ambition to collect data at the city level was but that nonetheless there were very good data available at the national level, and essentially this is what the database has been built on. So really in a few months I think it's quite extraordinary how much we have learned. I say we, most of them well, but the institution has learned about the nature of data. Yes. And I think as this process has gone on, we've also become more excited about what a powerful research tool this is, because all researchers have this need for data.
Yes.
There's an incredibly complicated jungle out there of data. You can easily go into the internet and you can get tables, and they may be wrong, they may be right. So Manuel has put an enormous amount of effort into trying to understand the origins of these data, which data you can rely upon, and so on. And so what we felt is that although there are a number of competitor organizations and individuals who are collecting large databases of open data, and open data is almost a sort of mantra now.
Yes.
There's a big difference between open data, which you can access, and data which you can actually believe.
Yes, correct.
So I think although we started off wanting to have a database about cities, we've gradually understood that that is perhaps too ambitious. But nonetheless, having a database of the highest possible quality of data which are available at a national or at a regional level gives us a tremendous sort of research advantage within SEC. And the point I wanted to make really is that this is not simply a project that Manuel has been doing for his own interest or for a small group. It really is intended to be a tool which is useful to all researchers in FRS and FCL. And therefore we really do want you to use it and also to contribute to it. It's to some extent it's a collective project, that if through your research you find yourself accessing data which are not in the database, then we really do urge you to put in that little additional effort so that it becomes part of that database.
Yes.
So that is really what we're trying to do. We've got a short term, a sort of 1-year project that Manuel has been driving with great energy to turn this into a database, to make the data accessible, but we hope the database will have a life beyond that year,
Yes.
and that it will actively grow because of the activities of the various researchers.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. But you know, just to come back to that initial goal of the sustainability, I mean, it was about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. We thought, how can we make a database that is on the city level and that reflects the problems that have to do with the SDGs, namely the urban SDG number 11. But the issue is just that most of the city data, if you want current data that's continuously updated, you have to go to the city government. And these data are not necessarily publicly available. You need to gain the trust from these governments. Now, how can you gain the trust? By showing that you actually work responsibly with data that they give you, and by creating relationships. And that I think we can do. Many of you already have contact with governments. You already have launched data requests from governments. But I think it would be great if there was a platform on which these efforts converge. Because otherwise it's just little silos that go up, and one research group may have really good data, but another cannot access it, has to start at zero. So once we have a platform on which these data initiatives can live, I think we have gained a lot. And the city level data and the sustainability data, I think we should still aim for, but I believe we needed to do this groundwork first, because otherwise we started from nothing and we already wanted to 100. And now we have something, we're a little more advanced, so the gap became much smaller to actually get really high quality data directly from city governments. Any other questions? Any other feedback? Yes?
Just to share to respond on Peter's comment about sustainability indicators or index. Before I moved to FCL, I've been working for 4 years in the US on a project that is benchmarking sustainable urban development. So we are working with 160 indicators, and we try to benchmark Singapore against other 12 cities. And that's really a 4 years project. We were 20 researchers, and it was such a painful process because we have so many data, but the problem is we cannot really compare because, for example, that waste indicator in Japan is really different from the way they counted it in Indonesia or other countries. So I think this kind of project is a research project, could be very interesting, but it's a different research altogether. I think it's really like 300% commitment for this kind of project. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I agree. I mean, it's one thing to say we want this, but then you also have to do it. And it's very tricky. Very tricky, but I think I'm very glad that Rongchun was available to help with acquiring the data, with organizing it, with writing the scripts, automating a lot of the processes. So basically, I think it's really possible to make such a platform. It's absolutely possible, but you know, we still have to do it, and it will not create itself.
In our experience, finally, because it was so difficult to get the data,
yes.
And then the people started to get so possessive,
yes.
because they have to clean the data, convert the data, and finally they want to share it.
Correct. Yeah, I understand.
That is quite sad, actually.
Yeah, that is sad, and that happens all the time. But see, I think that's why I'm so excited about this open data, namely the linked open data approach, because there you don't have that anymore, you know. And you can already release something that's quite dirty, because it doesn't matter if there's gaps and errors. You can analyze the data then with machines. If they have these tags, you can really query them. You can query millions of data sets very quickly. And it's very painful to go through every data set and clean it manually. But once you can have a computer do it on a large scale, then I think maybe that's a little bit less, you know, this being possessive about the data that they got, because all the data is available publicly anyway.
Would like to add the timeline of this project. So we will close this project in end of March. So it's not so much the questions to have ideas what else could be done, but to see if there is a single user or two users who would say, yes, we need something like that, who can create a case that we can understand that is actually useful and better than to simply just go to one of these sources directly, to justify that we actually need such a software. At the moment, it's a proposal that something like that will be useful for. If I was now in the shoes of a researcher, I would most likely come up with all kind of features that the cities should be visual, like in the picture which we see, and then we should have different sliders. But it's not about coming up with ideas for features. It's coming up, yes, what we have seen today, I can really use it because I want to do this or that, and can you help me to use the existing beta version to show me how I can get this or that? And these are the cases, I think, which Manuel asked for, and that has a time dimension to it. It's not a 5-year project which started and will continue. It will end next March. So if you have a case, he will be here in Monday, in December, but then when you wrap up the project, that is the whole February or March. So I think for those who have no cases, it's also important to say, we have no cases and we will never have a case. Or for those who have a case which is not yet also clear, to say, yes, we have a case, but we have not yet had time to look into the specifications. But it's very clear that we need something like that in the near future. So to figure out whether this project has a future beyond a March. Mm-hmm. So I've added this timeline to the discussion.
Yes. Yes, and that's very important. It's a very good point, because it's very important that we now get feedback from you guys. You know, if nobody uses it, then you're right, you know, then maybe nobody needs it. But so many people told me personally that they would really like to have something like this. So I think this is now really a chance to start using it and then also try to improve it, you know. Then you can also say it's not useful because of this and this and this. And then we can think about what could we do with, you know, the limited time we have to actually make it more useful. But in general, really, I urge you, that's why I also handed out these addresses, please use this database and give feedback. Doesn't matter if it's negative, it's no problem. But I just want to learn how people actually work with data.
I just have a question about rising in my mind.
Yes. Yes.
So, did you encounter any issues? Yes, with the licensing of the data?
The licensing of the data.
All open data licensed to be used freely? Are they restricted? Or
well, the open data,
aside
that's
from the quality, of course, of
yes.
the data.
You mean open data or publicly available data?
Actually, I was asking about the open data, but
open data.
an answer for both.
Because open data is a term. Open data means that the data is for freely available, and you don't have to pay to get it, and also that you can use it for anything you want.
Because there was a issue like that was going on online about that most of the publishers, they were not licensing, they were not giving a clear license for the data.
Correct.
So that's why I asked.
To answer this question, I had the same question I asked the lawyer.
Okay.
Now the lawyer are working on the case on what we can use, what we cannot use, whether you have to, if you have a mashup, for example, you combine 16 data sets, and I totally forgot. Do you have to list all the individual 16 sources, and if so, do you have to also list time when you download it? So that is one case. which we have as a pending small investigation with a local lawyer. And the answer is exactly that we know once we will use it, that we are not actually high risk topic and we get serious litigation cases without the local market.
Yeah, that's the issue.
It is a very good question.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact answer, but they said as long as you give the proper credits, and they have to go and check for all of those whether there is any points which restrict us in using it, for example. So that cannot be used in such a context, and that is a statement which we would most likely add as the metadata, what you will exactly copy-paste into a journal publication or book publications.
Yes, but see, with open data, I mean, open data is really definition. And many countries say, oh yeah, this is open data, but then they don't really follow this definition. So one really has to look into it. And I think that's why, I'm excited about it, because there you don't have that problem anymore. If you really see it through, then you can solve a lot of data-related problems. And for us, I think it's really interesting, because that is an issue. You have data by special request from the government. They say you can never use it for anything else than this. And so, that's really, really hard. What can you do with it? But yeah, there's many questions still, and it's a wide open field, really. Anything else? Like I said, you can always ask me things. We can always discuss things. Also, maybe I'll follow up with you in the next week at some point, whether how you could imagine yourself using the data, etc., etc. So I also want to learn what you're doing with the database, and to see whether we can make it better. Thank you.